Hello. Let's see. Doesn't look like we have any viewers yet. Let's present this to everyone. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Christy Bird, and this is a webinar on how to use escape rooms for team building. So there is this question and answer app on the side here. So if you have a question, then you can type it in there and I'll be able to see it and answer it. So I think I'll wait just a few more seconds to see if more people pop in, and then I'll go ahead and get started. Hello, Schober Industries. Okay, well, let me go ahead and get started. So here's what we're going to cover today. So what exactly is team building? I'll talk about educational learning theories about backward design and active learning as a way to think about how you should structure your sessions. And that ties into setting goals and choosing your activities. I'll talk a little bit about choosing assessment tools to use with your team building session, and then a bit about the process of actually facilitating these activities. And how do you keep everyone engaged? How do you determine what your style is when you're interacting with participants? Everyone really has their own style, but I'll kind of talk about 3 different styles that I've noticed that people tend to fall into. And the very end will be about pitching your services. So I'm going to try and talk for about 40 minutes and then leave time for questions. So for the people who just joined us, there's this question and answer app where you can type your question and I'll be able to answer it out loud. And you can also email me if you have questions. My email is christy@exitsantacruz.com. All right, so let's talk about who I am. So this is a picture of me. My name is Christy Bird again. So I work at University of California, Santa Cruz as an assistant professor of psychology. My PhD is in education and psychology, and so in that degree I learned about educational learning theories. I learned about how to structure how schools work as organizations, so it ties in a lot with industrial organizational psychology. And I also, of course, learned the psychological side of things. I teach child development now at UCSC and also educational psychology. So my training in facilitation really comes from working with the program of intergroup relations at the University of Michigan. And this was an organization that put on workshops and classes for faculty, for staff, for students, really focused on conflict resolution, but particularly around social identity. So how do you talk to people across diversity and across different backgrounds? And so a lot of my facilitation experience really comes from working with people around these really difficult topics of, hey, I have a different culture and that can cause conflict or it can cause miscommunications. And also helping people to realize that their identities do affect their interactions with each other and they affect how the world works. So I learned a lot about facilitation from that experience, but of course also I'm a teacher. So I teach courses at UCSC, and I'm kind of known for my active learning, which I'll talk about what that is a little bit later. But I'm really known for coming up with lots of activities for the students to use and to do in classes, even in classes of sort of 120 students or so. There's a lot of ways that you can incorporate fun things that help students to really engage with what they are learning. So that's about me. Since my research is also about diversity, I've served on some committees in the Chancellor's Diversity Advisory Council, which is really just about advising the Chancellor of the university on how to deal with diversity issues on campus. So that's where my background is coming from. I've been working in this area for about almost 10 years now, and I have experience with a lot of different types of groups. So, groups of older adults, groups of faculty, groups of staff, and of course groups of college students and sometimes high school students as well. All right, so that's enough about me. So let's talk about what team building is. So team building is really, we use the term in the escape room Facebook groups as kind of like, oh, well, you do team building when you have a corporate group come through your room. But really team building is this more general process of how does a group and think about what strengths and weaknesses they have and how they go about improving them. So it's more intensive than just one session. It's about evaluating what the team's needs are, designing an intervention, implementing that, and then figuring out whether it worked. So this is really something that businesses can go through and spend months and months and years even actually improving. When we're talking about team building for escape rooms, we're usually talking about a session. So we're having a session where a group is coming in and they want to work on a particular goal. As an escape room owner, I'm sure you don't want to spend a lot of your time, just helping businesses with their general processes. So what you should really do is think about your team building as a session to help them meet one goal, that they value at that time. So I'm going to talk about how you design those sessions. Okay, so when you think about facilitation, there's really 4 main challenges in making sure things go well. Everyone's been in a really boring meeting or professional development, or it's just like, I don't know why I'm here, I don't want to be here, it's terrible, you don't feel like you learn anything at the end. And so you definitely want to avoid that with your escape room. It might be enough to think like, okay, well, yeah, sure, an escape room, it's a fun thing. Of course, people are going to find value in it. But that's not really true. Actually, people won't find value in just doing the experience unless you actually build on what that experience means for their away from, is what you need to help them understand. But so here are the challenges in designing that experience. So the content, obviously, the escape room is part of that. But you also have to add things around the escape room to make sure people are really learning. Then how do you keep them engaged? And this is where disruptive participants come in. I define disruptive participants as just anyone who is not necessarily into the flow of the session. So how do you deal with them? What do you do? And then that also ties into your facilitation style, which is as an individual, you're up there. How do you make sure people pay attention to you and that you get people through your learning objectives? All right, so let's start with talking about content. So from learning theory, we know that the best way to design lessons or activities is to start with the end in mind. So this is called backward design. So that means you start with what your learning objectives are, and then you choose your activities. You might be thinking, well, I already have the activities in the escape room, but I'm going to talk about how you choose other activities that go with the escape room to really meet certain learning objectives. In order to determine what your learning objectives are, you have to sit down with the requester and talk to them about what they need. And so it can usually be helpful to think in terms of what characteristics does a high-performing team have, right? So this is from some literature on team building and on successful organizations, and this is the kind of things that a team that really works well has to know. So things like having clear goals, right? They need to know what they're doing. They need to communicate with each other effectively. They need to be able to resolve disagreements. They need to, feel like they care about what this team is doing and feel connected to the other people in the team. So when you have a corporate group come to you for team building, they are going to have some issue or some reason that they think that this will be helpful. And your job in that first meeting with the requester is to determine what can your room do to best meet a need of the requester. Now, like I said, team building is a very general process. For your one session, you're not going to be able to meet all of these goals. You're not going to be able to help the team improve on everything. What you will do is probably choose like 3 or 4 goals that you can focus on in one session. And your goal is really to just improve a little bit on each of those, and also to build a foundation for that team to keep improving later if they so choose. But what you're really doing in your first meeting with the requester is getting a sense of what's the most pressing thing that they care about, and then what is something that your room can actually help them with. So here's some questions that you can ask the requester, right? So you can just ask them, so tell me about your team, what kind of things do you do? What kind of issues come up? What is there a conflict that happened recently? When I was working at the University of Michigan, a lot of groups came to us when it's like, okay, well, there was this particular thing that happened in the residence hall and we need a workshop on how to address that. And that's the kind of thing where you want to know if that happened because it's going to come up during a session, or at least people are going to kind of know that, okay, this is something that we need to work on. So if there is a conflict, then you definitely want to make sure that that's a part of your planning. Other times it could be just said, okay, well, we just want to have a fun experience. You generally want to get more detailed than just a fun experience from the requester, because just having fun, like I'll talk about with active learning, having fun is great. People love to have fun, but at the end, they're not necessarily going to feel like they got anything out of the experience. So you will want to see, okay, what are some strengths that the team has, or what are some weaknesses? What are some ideal things that you would like to see after the team goes through this? And it could be, building rapport or having the team feel closer to each other. That's a more specific goal than just say having fun. So you can assess those kind of things in your meeting with the requester. And as you're having this meeting, sorry, I'm looking at one of the questions. So as you're having this meeting, you really want to think about what's the best match between your room and the room of the meeting. And so we have the question from Dave here, is that the groups are just price shopping, right? They want to go for something cheap. And so what you want to do is you want to help you want to help the organizations understand the value of your room, right? So a lot of escape rooms out there, they're just going to have you can go through the room and it'll be fun. But if you can tell them, okay, I'm going to have this meeting with you, I'm going to really assess what your needs are, and I'm going to build a session that is unique to your needs, then you'll have them, it may not necessarily lead to more bookings, but you'll have more high quality bookings, and you'll be able to charge more because you have that value that really adds to what they're doing. So I hope that answers your question, Dave. If you really just want more bookings, then there's really no reason to do like intensive team building sessions. You could just offer the room to like normal paying customers. But if you do want to be able to charge more for the corporate bookings and to really draw in people who are looking for a specific experience, then you can really say, here's the things that we add to them. All right, so once you meet with the requester, you'll want to sit down with the goals that you took from your notes and the strengths of your room. So you'll want to think about what can your room offer that meets those goals. So when you're designing a session that really meets some learning objectives, what I want to talk about is this idea of active learning. Now, a lot of people think of active learning as just having fun, but that's not really what it means. Active learning is about being engaged in the learning process. The individual is thinking about what they're learning, they're processing it, they're interacting with other people. There's a lot of literature on the idea that just even having to talk with someone and explain your viewpoint to someone else really does promote your understanding of the material a lot better than just sitting and passively listening to it. Kind of like you're doing now. Like you can definitely learn from lectures, you can definitely learn from just sitting and listening. But the better learning comes when you're actually actively engaged. So escape rooms, they're definitely active, but they're not always learning. So the activities that I'm going to talk about today are really how you build in the learning part with the escape room as active thing. But what you'll also want to think about is part of active learning is using a variety of activities, right? So you want people to not just be in one type of group the entire time. You want them sometimes thinking individually, sometimes sharing with 2 or 3 other people, and sometimes having the whole group talking to each other. What this allows you to do is it requires different levels of engagement and also requires the participant to kind of shift their thinking and to look at the material in a slightly different way with each of these levels of activities. So that is another way to really promote active learning. Now with the escape room, it's something where people are usually working more at an individual or small group level, but then when you have the debrief afterward, then you can have a large group and sort of say, okay, everyone, tell me about your experiences. And that allows people to understand, like, oh, this was happening when you were over in this corner, or I was over in this corner. So these two parts of active learning, being actively engaged with the material, having different levels of involvement. And then the last thing is revealing your learning objectives and not just telling the participants what you want to get out of it. I'll talk a little bit more about this later in terms of leading discussions, but it's people learn more when they feel like the learning comes from within them, when they have a revelation that says, oh, this is what happened, or now I understand it, now I get it. It's much less effective for someone to just tell you, you need to be better at your conflict resolution, right? If they can see for themselves how their style influenced the resolution of a conflict, then that's going to be a much more enduring lesson. So your job as a facilitator is really to guide people through this process. And that's where the difficulty comes in, right? It's so much easier to just tell someone what you think they should know. But really the best learning comes from when you can design your activities and you can lead the discussion in such a way that people arrive at those conclusions on their own. All right, and so, like I said, with backward design, you want your activities to meet your goals. So the escape room is going to be one activity, and you can think about what is it that's, what kind of skills does your room involve? Is it really heavy on like word puzzles? Is it more physical types of activities? And then you can think about how does that fit with the requester's goals. So if it's a group that has trouble communicating, right, and your room is something that has a lot of pieces of information that are separated and people need to be able to put all those pieces of information together, that might be a good room for a group that has struggles with that. Another example is if you have a room that requires people to focus more individually, right? And people are feeling like, oh, I'm not so good at my job, I'm not very efficacious, then that can be a room where people, if they have a lot of individual tasks, that someone can solve it and feel like, oh yeah, I actually did something, I actually contributed to the group. So you can think about your room in that level. I'm not really advocating that you actually change your room or tailor it to any specific groups. I think that what would be most effective is to actually tailor your activities before and after to the group, and then you can just say, okay, well, this type of room is better for these goals. So when you're designing the whole agenda, here's what I suggest. I suggest putting your escape room maybe in the middle, starting out with some high energy icebreaker or some type of, kind of easing them into the day activity. You want to set guidelines for discussion. So this is just, what kind of things, the question we ask is, what do we need to have in place so that everyone can feel comfortable sharing, right? So even though these are people who have been working together, you still want to make sure that they understand that in this space, in your session, there are rules or guidelines about how to take care of each other, how to be respectful toward each other, and also, set some expectations for, is this something that can leave the space? If we share something in here, is this something that is okay to go back and talk about at work? So if someone shares a personal story or something like that, you really do want to, be able to have everyone feel comfortable. So then you're going to do your escape room, you might do another activity, and then you want to do a some sort of wrap-up activity. Okay, so we have another question here from Dave. So how do you train your game masters to do these things, especially when you're paying them $10 an hour? They can run the room and debrief just fine. But talking about conflict resolution. So yeah, so this is a good question, because what you want to be able to do is your game masters also need to be trained in facilitation, right? So if you're going to have your game masters leading these sessions, then they need to be people who can understand how to lead a discussion and how to help the team meet their goals, right? So this is another part of that value added component. When you are selling this service, you would really want to make sure that what skills your game masters have. And so you would have to invest a little bit more into them. So they're not just running the room. They are also leading these activities too. And it's really the case that you can also find people who are really good at these things too. So if you have someone who's a teaching assistant at a college, if you have college students that are a teaching assistant, or if you work with someone who already does some teaching, they're going to be a lot easier to train in this kind of thing. They'll be able to understand, like, okay, here's how you lead discussion, here's how you help people get through these things. Okay, so let me know if you have more questions on that. All right, so here, and these activities too that I'm going to talk about, the concentric circles, active listening, and goal setting, they're actually really easy to facilitate. So these are some good starter activities if you haven't done a lot of facilitation before. So the concentric circles activity, this is where you literally have people stand in concentric circles. One circle is facing inward and one circle is facing outward. And this is a really good activity for kind of starting the day or the session, because it helps people just to talk to each other. You know, it's pretty comfortable, pretty informal, and you also kind of build this rapport. Like you might talk to someone about a topic that you never really talked about at work before, and that can help them feel like, okay, this is something new. I'm actually learning something. I'm getting to know this other person. So the activity is literally they stand in circles, you give everyone a prompt, and then you say, talk to your partner about this for 3 to 4 minutes. And then one of the circles will rotate so that they have a new partner. You repeat it. And then you just repeat it a couple of times depending on how long you want this activity to go for. And the nice thing about this activity is, like I said, it is pretty easy to facilitate and it's really easy to get into, but you can really tailor the prompts to what the learning objectives are, right? So if you have a team that needs to focus on conflict resolution, one of your prompts could be, okay, talk about a time when you had a conflict and how did you resolve it? Or talk about how your family handled conflict in the past. It's really good to, this kind of activity, it's really often nice to have prompts that refer to people's past or their family life growing up, because most people don't really get into those kind of things in normal workday conversations. And so it can help the people to feel like I really learned something new about my partner. But also you have to think about it a little bit, right? If you're reflecting on the past and like, how did my family handle conflict? And how might that affect me today? How might that affect me in my work life? Then that can really help them to build on this activity into the future, parts of the session. So this is a really good activity that's extremely, extremely flexible. And so yes, I do want to acknowledge James' comment here. It is advocating to partner with the experienced facilitator or a team building company. It's really good to have someone experienced to help you do this. But I do think that there's lots of things that you as an individual can also do with a little practice. So this active listening activity, another one very easy to facilitate. You basically put people into groups of 3, sometimes 4 if you want to have 2 observers. And what they do is one person will talk, the listener will comment on what they heard. They're basically repeating back what they heard. And so since this is active listening, the listener is trying to make sure and trying to convey that they really did hear everything that the speaker was saying. They're not adding their own ideas about it. They're really just not repeating back word for word, but saying, here's what I got from what you said. And then the observer's job is to comment on both speaker and the listener to say, okay, here's where this was accurate, here's what this wasn't accurate, here's what your body language was like when you were listening, here's what your body language was like when you were sharing about this prompt. And so this is to help people become more aware of what they do when they're listening. This activity is really surprisingly hard for people, especially in the listener role for the first time, because they can't talk while the speaker is talking. And for many people, it's really hard for them to not respond. Even when I do this activity, I find myself nodding a lot and trying to, engage without actually saying anything. But it's really very rewarding to be able to force yourself to listen, right? So that's the whole point of this activity, is you really are teaching yourself to listen in a new way, and that's great to build on for later. So this is an activity where you can do it before or after the escape room, but it's really something where you can use it to show people, okay, you can tie it back to the escape room and say, okay, what happened during this puzzle when you were solving this puzzle? Is this something that, you know, listening more actively or having better listening skills could have helped you with? And people can start to realize, like, oh yeah, it might have been more helpful. Okay, so then in that activity, everyone rotates through all the roles so they can get a sense of doing that. Okay, so Dave has another question. So how much more per person do you charge to add? How much more time does it add? And how do you adjust your time slots? No, these are great questions. So I think that how much more you would charge would really be dependent on your business model and actually the time, like whether it's going to be during a time you're not usually open, you know, how much did you spend on training the facilitators, how experienced are your game masters in terms of facilitating. So those are the kind of things where you would really have to decide. I wouldn't say for our team building, and you can also choose the time. So you can do this in 2 hours, an hour and a half. You could do it in 3 hours. I really wouldn't recommend more than 3 or 4 hours. Most people just cannot maintain attention for that long. And also, you know, you would really have to be experienced to have some experience at least to, you know, engage with a group for that long. So I'd really say about 2 hours is probably ideal if you're just starting out and doing this kind of thing. And so with that, I would say that you could charge what you would charge for people being in there for 2 hours, but also a little bit more for that value added component. So what we do is we do this during the day, so it's not really the same as the escape room times. Our sessions are 2.5 hours, and then they're only during the day. So it's really more for the exact, it's really not within the normal time slots, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then it's just about paying yourself for your time. So how much do you want to get paid per hour? Okay, so then the goal setting activity, this is about just having the group set some goals, right? So this is a really straightforward activity. Like if the group its team isn't really sure what they're doing, or they have disagreements about what they're doing, having this goal setting is really enlightening, right? For people to be able to say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I thought we were supposed to be doing this and you thought we were supposed to be doing this other thing. So this activity is basically where you have someone sort of say, this is what we're doing. This is what our general idea of the project is. And then you work in 3 different levels. You start as an individual. Each person lists what they think the goals are. Then you get into small groups and you say, okay, this is what I thought the goals were. And then you create 2 lists. One is where, okay, yeah, we all agree this is a goal. And then here's some things, I don't know if we should be working on that, right? The small groups is really just to start generating a lot of ideas. And then you take it to the large group, right? And you say, okay, you make another list. Here's all the things we agreed on. It's usually very easy to say like, okay, yeah, we understand this. And then the other goals is where the real discussion is going to happen. You really have to help the team think about, okay, is this really something we can do within the time frame we have? Is this a value of the company? Is this a value of everyone in this room, right? And you help the team negotiate what goals they really need to focus on. You don't have to spend so much time on the agreed upon ones, but you do want to help them walk through the ones that they don't necessarily agree on yet, and have people sort of justify why they think that should be a goal, and also help them think about the resources that are available to them and what they can actually do. But then the key part of this activity is at the end, after you've gone through this, then you sort of say to everyone, okay, here's what we came up with, here's some things that you all agreed on, and here's some things that you still need to work on. Can you all commit to these goals, right? So you just kind of do like a cheesy, like, yeah, we do it, you know, just so that everyone can feel like, okay, yeah, we did agree to this. So when they go back to the workplace, they can really have a very clear sense, we decided on something and we all committed to it. So this is a, you know, really good activity for having a very concrete plan at the end. Okay, and so I will talk now about using assessment tools. So I have a list of these in the handout, a handout of all of these on our website. And so the thing is that I'm not a really huge fan of assessments for these types of short activities, but some people do use them, some people find them valuable. The thing about assessments is you really want to use something that's pretty short, that's easy for people to measure, but they have to be aligned, with your goals. So you can use assessments in a lot of different ways. You can go over them as an activity. You can say, oh, here's where everyone fell on their conflict resolution style. And then you can have people get into groups by their style and talk about, okay, these are the similarities we see with each other. This is where our style plays out in these different situations. Or you could just use the assessments as information, right? You could say, okay, everyone, here's your score. Go home and think about that. There's some activities that you can do where you actually use the assessment, to structure it a bit more. But for the types of assessments I have here, they're more motivational. They're more about understanding who you are and where your beliefs are. Those are definitely more on the informational side and not necessarily something that you're going to have people working on within your short session. I'm just going to show you one of the assessments, but the rest are on this link here, so you can go to that. The mindset one, I don't know if people have heard of Carol Dweck's work, but she basically says that there are two types. There's more than two, but there are two types of mindsets about how you understand ability or intelligence, right? There's a fixed mindset, which basically says that you're born with a certain amount of intelligence and you're just stuck with it. And then there's a growth mindset, which says you can actually change how intelligent you are. You can learn more. You can actually increase your skill. Like, intelligence is just a skill. Whereas a fixed mindset is more, nope, you either have it or you don't, or you have a certain amount of it, and that's it. Where these two mindsets have implications is how you approach work, right? So someone with a fixed mindset, if they approach a problem and they have trouble with it, they might give up on it and just say, okay, well, I just don't have the ability to do this, and there's no point in me continuing with this. Whereas someone with a growth mindset might approach that same problem and say, okay, I had trouble with this, but that means there's a skill that I don't know yet, or there's something I need to learn. And they might go back, learn something and then reapproach the problem. So you might be able to see how these different types of mindsets can influence how you work with other people. So someone with a fixed mindset might not see, why are you still working on that? You're clearly having problems. It's clearly not for you. Whereas with someone with a growth mindset, was like, no, obviously this is still valuable for me to work on. I am going a little short on time, so I'm just going to keep going. But if you have more questions about the assessments, I can definitely talk about that. Okay, so another question from Dave. So 10 people is $260 for every customer, and then you would charge additional $260 to add the team building for an hour, and even more if it was 2 hours. I wouldn't necessarily charge more than, I guess this is what, $520. So our team building sessions are $500 for the 2 or 3 hours. I don't think that I would do it necessarily by the hour, but it's really more, I think that it's useful to think about how much is this normally, how much is this time normally worth, and then a little bit extra for your time. Okay, so talking about engagement. So what makes people bored? It's either interest value is not there, which means they just don't usually enjoy this type of thing, this intrinsic motivation. The utility value is not there. They don't see it as a useful activity, or the attainment value is not there. They don't see it as an important activity. So like I said, with active learning, not everything has to be fun. There's a lot of things that we do that aren't necessarily fun, but we see it as important to who we are as people or to our role, or we see it as useful. Like, I'm going to sit through this algebra class because I'll be able to use it later on. So you can help the people in the session to stay engaged by focusing on these different types of values, right? So interest value is not really something you can change. People are either going to like it or they're not, but you can really highlight the utility value and the attainment value by helping people understand this is the goal that we're trying to reach. This is how these activities are going to reach this goal. This is why achieving this goal is useful for your team, or this is how this goal will help you become a better team member. It's really important to help people not be confused. You know, clear instructions, practice your instructions, read them to people, check in during the sessions. It's always surprising to me how many people will not ask a question when they are confused. I don't know if it's just because they don't trust you or just because they think that they're embarrassed, or because they're embarrassed, but you do need to check in with groups as you're going along to make sure they understand what your instructions are. Environmental distractions, you know, snacks are always a good thing. People get hungry, people get tired, the room might be too cold, that's going to distract people. And then the key thing for leading discussions, especially in a larger group, is to have what I call the discussion path. So when I first started teaching, I really just kind of opened it up like, okay, what do you think about this? And then people would just comment. I'd be like, oh, that's good, that's great, that's great. And you know, the end of that would be like, we didn't really talk about anything because everyone's just sort of sharing their beliefs and there's no point to it. So now I structure my discussions a lot more formally, right? And you can do this in a highly visible way where it's very clear what you're doing, or you can do it in a more subtle way. But the real point is that what you're doing is you're responding and following up on the comments that help you go toward your learning objectives. And you're acknowledging the comments that don't go toward those objectives, but you're not really spending a lot of time on them. You're really just moving toward those comments that are going to help you with meeting that learning objective. So this is a part of the revealing and not telling, right? You have to help the people to say, okay, you know, this is what the kind of revelations that this group needs to get to. If someone says a comment that is closer to that, then I'm going to encourage that comment. It's just reinforcement, right? It's classical conditioning. You're reinforcing the comments that help you get to there, and you're ignoring the comments that don't get you there. And it might seem kind of harsh, but you'd have a limited amount of time with people, so you want to maximize the effectiveness of that time. And then another thing you think about in discussions is you're going from specific to general and general to specific. And what this means is that you start your discussion with specific experiences by saying, okay, what happened in this moment, right? And in this room, oh, I had to use, you know, I had to brute force this one puzzle. And then you get toward, you know, a general conclusion. You help them think about how does that behavior work out in your day-to-day life, right? So I was in an escape room a couple of months ago where I brute forced a lock because I just got so frustrated with it that I wasn't willing to go through the general process to do it. And then you can think about, oh, well, actually, in my day-to-day life, that's also how I approach problems sometimes. I'll spend a lot of time on it, but if I don't think that I can get to it through the normal way, I will just, you know, try to go around it. So that's the kind of general conclusions you want people to get to. And of course, they're going to match your learning objectives. And then you also start with general questions. So the questions like, you know, how did you feel in this room? And then as you move along in the discussion, you're asking questions more specifically that tie to those learning objectives. So I want you to think about this path of discussion and general specific and specific to general as being laid on top of each other, right? You are moving the discussion through a particular trajectory, right? You're not just letting people say whatever, you're guiding them. Okay, let me talk about disruptive participants. So this is a facilitator's biggest fear is how do you deal with people who are, you know, outside of what you are expecting, right? So there's some people who will just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And sometimes they're great because if other people are quiet, it will encourage them to speak up. But sometimes they can try and take over. And so you really, as a facilitator, have to manage them by saying, thank you for that. Let's hear from someone who hasn't spoken yet. If you set guidelines in the beginning, some of the guidelines can be, we want to make sure everyone gets a chance to share. In sort of our intergroup relations talk, we call this step up, step back. So step up and make sure that you are talking, and step back if you're talking a lot, then, you know, sit back a little bit and let other people talk. So, you know, reminding people of the guidelines, you really as a facilitator have to enforce the guidelines, and you can do it in a very gentle way. But quiet people are the opposite of the talkers, right? You have no idea why they're so quiet, so sometimes you do have to check in with them. You know, they might be upset, they might be emotionally upset by something that happened. It could be that they're the ones who are bored and they don't see any value in this. So that's really important when you need to get them to talk, because if they're bored, they might have a legitimate objection to the way the conversation is going. Like, we haven't addressed this important problem. And when you bring that problem to the group, then everyone else can deal with it, and that's really important. So quiet people can be quiet for a lot of reasons. It's important to get them engaged. And engaging with them doesn't necessarily have to be in the large group. Sometimes you can take people aside and figure out what's going on. Escape room enthusiasts are really particular to doing this with escape rooms, because your enthusiasts can totally throw off the dynamic of the session, right? Because in the room, they might be someone who is usually, you know, at work, they're usually really quiet. They don't do much in terms of like in leading. But then once they get in the room, like, I know what I'm doing, and they're going to take over. And that can be fun for them and fun for the other people too, to see this different side of them. But it could also sort of get in the way of this natural, what you're trying to observe with the group and help them resolve is how they function at work. So it's important to think about your enthusiasts in terms of how do you help them understand what their role in the room should be and what the goals of the session are. And that's really by starting out the session by saying, this is what we want you to get out of this. But then within the room too, you might need to send some subtle reminders to say, okay, you know, I know that you're really excited about this, but can we also help other people to enjoy the experience in the same way? And then in the discussion after the room, they might really want to spend a lot of time talking about the puzzles or whatever, but you're the leader and you have to focus on your path to the discussion. Okay, so our turtles are people, I could say, that they just don't get it. And unfortunately, when you're teaching any group of people, not everyone is at the same pace. And so sometimes you just have to let them, go. You'll have to move on, and hopefully they can catch up later. If you have a co-facilitator, it's really convenient because they can be the ones to say, okay, let me take you aside and really work with you on this, while the rest of the group moves on. So complaining people are actually the scariest in terms of they're going to talk a lot and they're going to be very loud, but they're actually the easiest to deal with because you know what your learning objectives are. You know why you chose these activities. So you really just have to be confident and sort of reinforce this idea of this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing, and this is the value it will have to your team. And another helpful thing is that you can ask the other participants, so what did you get out of this activity? And that can quiet the complainer because it's coming from their peers, and also they're saying like, oh, well, maybe I'm the only one who's not, you know, who has this issue. The space aliens is just the people who they would just make some completely wild comment and you have no idea how to respond or what to do about them. And usually it's just best to move on. You might ask again for clarification and just look at their team members to see if like, okay, is this the kind of thing they normally say? Is this really weird? And the team members also think it's weird. Okay, then you can move on. Or you can try and work with a little more. But I would say don't stay confused. Don't engage too long with comments that you don't understand, because it's just going to take away from actually meeting the learning objectives if you're just spending time up there going around in circles with someone. So this is kind of like the turtle approach. You have to move on and focus on your goals. Okay, so we have another comment here. So this is where they're saying we had management played a room and requested to know things like who did what the fastest, who pressed the do not press button, and who achieved the physical challenges. Yeah, so this is the kind of thing. So I'll mention Liz Blyce at the end, who she does these analysis of rooms where she really looks at those kind of in-game moments and helps and analyzes what happens during the team play. And I think that that is could be really useful. But for you as the facilitator, I think it's better for you to rely on the participants to analyze those things. That's why the debriefing after the room can be useful, where you can bring up these kind of questions and you can say, okay, what did it actually mean for the participants in the room when they were doing that? And they're providing the analysis, you're not providing the analysis, right? So it's taking the load off of you and putting it on the participants to really decide, what did this mean? So that's the approach that I would say, like, if you have people asking you to do that, I think that that's something that you could tell them. It's really better when it comes from the participants to decide these things. If the management wants to watch the video themselves and look at who did what the fastest, then they can certainly do that. You can provide the video if you want. But I think that your efforts are probably better spent in facilitating conversations around those kind of things, not necessarily in providing that kind of analysis, unless you're someone like Liz and are really devoting your time to that. And of course, charging for it. Okay, so facilitation style. These are just 3 styles, and there's a continuum of them. But you have to think about, so you as a facilitator is going to be different from you in your day-to-day life. There are definitely going to be some similarities, right, because it's still you, but how you engage with a group of people, especially a large group of people, it can be really surprising how different you are. But in terms of leading a discussion and asking questions of people, there's really a couple of main styles. The moderator style, this is the style I use, where you throw out a question, you get a response, you kind of let the participants talk to each other, right? You say, oh, okay, what do other people think about that? Or, you know, what's another example of that? So you're really helping the participants build on each other's comments, right? And then every so often you will summarize what you're hearing and move to a different point. Whereas a commentator style is much more, you're responding to each individual comment. You're like, oh, comment. Oh, that's really interesting. What do you think about this? And your engagement is much more one-on-one, and you're really more going in after, you're speaking after each comment. Whereas a moderator style is more, you only speak after every 5 to 10 comments. And so the style is really up to you in terms of their strengths and weaknesses in both. Some people prefer to have the facilitator be more active. Some participants prefer that. You know, they really want to feel like you're doing something, you know, in order to get that value out of it. But sometimes people enjoy the opportunity to really force themselves to think and to engage with each other, especially for the team that has really good rapport. They don't necessarily need you commenting on every single comment, right? They might just prefer that you kind of guide their overall discussion. So that's just something that you'll have to feel out as you get into it. The devil's advocate, this is just someone who, you know, is really challenging to the participants. And I would say do this at your own risk. It really takes a kind of a, you know, maybe if you went to law school, then you would have a better sense of how to do this very well. But it's really something that can be intimidating to a lot of people. And you would want to do it with the right type of group. So some groups are really, you know, kind of very competitive, macho, and this style might really work well for them because they feel like, okay, yeah, I'm being forced to think. But whatever you do, be positive, right? You don't have to be super sunny, but you don't want to spend time complaining or making, you know, frustrated faces at people. You really want to feel like you want to convey the sense that you trust the group to get to their objective, and that you agree, you think that where they're going is a good place, and you think that they're on the good path because, of course, you're leading that path. And then an authoritative presence, you really have to control the room. So this is enforcing the guidelines, making sure people are being respectful to each other, and making sure you stay on that path and not allowing tangents. Like, again, you have a short amount of time with people, so you really have to make sure that you are getting to those learning objectives. Okay, and so then I'll kind of end by talking about how do you pitch these things, right? So the pitching is really about knowing what your room brings, what your capacities are, and what your business model is. And so I'm sort of presenting this as, here's how you take your escape room generally as it is, and then add some activities around in order to say, okay, we're going to offer something really valuable to a corporate group. So what you offer is all around those things. So what's in your room that makes it fun? What's in your room that can help a team learn or reach a certain objective to be more high performing? What kind of activities can you do that really build on those objectives, or helps people reflect on what they experienced in the room and actually take back to their workplace? And then what's your business model, like I was talking about? How much are you going to charge in terms of what's the value of your time? How much do you have to train your game masters to do this if they're going to be the facilitators? Are you open during the day already? Is it going to be an extra bout of work to do this? And then anticipating objectives is really about, I don't want to pay extra. I just want to do a fun thing. Well, you have to convince them that there's some value in not just having fun. Like I said, active learning is not just about having fun, it's also about learning. And that's where the reflective part comes in. The activities that you're going to do are going to help people to take what they experience in the room and actually apply it to their day-to-day work lives. Those are the kind of things that you have to sort of develop a pitch for. Okay, I do want to spend a little time with more questions. So here's a summary and then more questions. So I wrote a book that kind of summarized a lot of my experience over the years. So I have all the things I talked about, a lot more details, have some sample agendas in there, more activities that you can do with different groups, all those assessments that are in the PDF on our website. I talked about managing your own emotions and managing emotions of participants, because something that I just personally have had the most trouble with as a facilitator is, how do you deal with when the fact that you actually have emotions and you have these emotional reactions? It's nice to think that, oh, all these things are going to happen and I'm going to be this nice and controlled facilitator and just going to lead this group through this activity. But when you get surprised, or when you get angry, or when you're just super excited about something, you can become a disruption to the session as well. So it's important to think about your own triggers, is what we call them in the intergroup relations field. Just what makes you emotional and how are you going to move past that. And then working with co-facilitators. Okay, and so then, if you want to talk more with me about doing some of this stuff, setting the stuff up, then I'm available. And also I wanted to give a shout out to Liz, who does, if you want to outsource all of this, she, like I mentioned, will do video analyses of your groups as an add-on, and then she creates a whole report and everything, and she sends it to you, and you can put your logo and everything on it and send it to the corporation. So you won't necessarily be doing it all yourself. Okay, so Dave is now asking. So we started with the team building option, and so we're just starting out. So we haven't had groups do the team building just specifically yet. We just have them, we have it as an option. So now right now we haven't had any groups to do this. I've done these activities with my research labs around the escape rooms, and I would say that that's really where my experience with this particular with doing it as the escape room plus the activities comes from. Okay, so other questions. Let me see if there's other things to comment on. And also, if you offer these kinds of resources, or you want to pitch yourself a bit on there, then I definitely think it would be great for people to comment with their links and email addresses so that people can contact you for more. Great. Well, you are welcome. So David's asking, when you break things, how do you incorporate that? Well, it could be a good opportunity to talk about that what is their type of behavior in the workplace too. It's so interesting. So I have an example from one of my classes where we played this game. It's called Star Power. It's basically a game of trading the think of it as you're trading coins and trying to get the most coins, but really what it does is set up the idea of a social class, because at some point the group that has the most value coins gets to set the rules for the rest of the groups. And it's so funny because I was teaching this class and we were talking about social class, talking about privilege and oppression, and while they were playing the game they completely forgot about all of that. It was just like, you know, winner take all. Some people were, you know, trying to cheat and hide their coins, and other people were you know, the group that's gotten power, they completely set the rules. And it was so funny when we had the discussion afterward to talk about how did you play that game, and then you think about, you know, how does this relate to real social class? And they had this like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. You know, when I was in power, I tried to deny it to everyone. But, you know, UC Santa Cruz students are very like socially active. So, but, you know, I'm advocating for socialism and all this stuff. I'm a Bernie Sanders fan and all this thing. So it's really funny to think about how people are different when they're playing a game versus how their attitudes in real life. And that's also where the discussions afterward and the reflection can play a role, because it's like once they understood like how much they gotten caught up into the game and how that changed their behavior, they could also understand then, okay, in a social class, you know, in real life, this is what happens when people are wealthy or when they you know, are making policies, right? They may not intentionally be saying, oh, I want to screw the poor people. It's more that they might have different goals than if you're looking at it from an outside perspective. So this is why active learning is very fun, because you can really help people to understand things in a different way. Okay, well, so I'm gonna end it there. Like, so my email address is christy@exitsantacruz.com. I'm also on the Facebook group, so if anyone wants to message me on Facebook as well. Thank you all so much for watching and your questions, especially Dave and James and Schober Industries. And I will end it there. So have a good day, everyone.